Hi, I'm Greg Cangelosi, the chairman and co-founder of Baltimore, and it's my honor to welcome you to this week's session of Founder City. Founder City brings you curated content every Wednesday now and through mid-June, and actually, including Tuesdays, due to popular demand. Topics include the power of influence of early-stage companies, the announcement of Upsurge, an intro into creating Baltimore as an equitech city, social impact, diversity, equity, inclusion, med device innovation, and cryptocurrency and decentralized finance. Also, one big quick push for our pitch competition, open to all Maryland-based startups. It's still open for submission all the way up through May 28th using ThumbRaise, our partner application. It's an app-based video pitch platform that gives you excellent analytics on all activity with your pitch, including who's viewing it, direct feedback from investors and advisors and mentors. Our cash and prizes will include up to $25,000 to all top applicant companies. So please go to www.foundercity.com for all information. Today's session is brought to you by the Economic Alliance of Greater Baltimore. Michele Whelley and her team have curated a powerhouse panel discussion on growing talent here in the state of Maryland. Now, Michele holds a special place in my heart because prior to her career at the Economic Alliance of Greater Baltimore, we hired her as a consultant back in 2015 to write what were the initial grants to get Baltimore funded as a nonprofit from the Evil Foundation, Franz Merrick Foundation, and the T. Rowe Price Foundation. And it all got us going here at Baltimore. So thanks again, Michele, for that. The recording of today's session will be available on the Founder City website at foundercity.com/program and also can be found on today's sponsor program website, www.greaterbaltimore.org. So let's get things rolling with today's session. It is my pleasure to turn it over to Michele Whelley, President, CEO of EAGB. Take it away, Michele.
Good afternoon, and thanks, Greg, for that kind introduction. Thanks particularly to Baltimore and FITCI for bringing the ecosystem together to collaborate on Founder City. A reminder that startup submissions to the pitch competition are open at greaterbaltimore.com. I'm not going to read the extensive bios of our experts on this panel. It would probably take up the full hour because they have a wealth of information they're about ready to share with you. But I will do some basic introductions. First, we have Jacob Shu, who is the CEO of Catalyte. Catalyte is a workforce data science and software engineering company headquartered in Baltimore City. They produce diverse, affordable, and sustainable talent for the world's most progressive companies. Catalyte closes the talent gap by leveraging an AI-based algorithm to identify exceptional individuals with the aptitude to become great developers and with a proprietary talent transformation program that creates ready-to-hire software engineers. And these engineers that come through Catalyte's training programs will be in place throughout the greater Baltimore area and well beyond. Next, let me introduce Emily Branchaw. Emily is the Director of Workforce Programs at Umbc Training Centers. Her team's mission is to provide robust professional development and certification programs to those who may otherwise not have access to career pathways due to funding, education, or opportunity. She has directed the UMBC Training Center's Cybersecurity Analyst Registered Apprenticeship Program since 2018 and is currently working with partners nationwide to develop technical instruction for apprenticeships and work study programs. Third, let me introduce Dr. Mary Way Bolt. Dr. Bolt is the 5th president of Cecil College, bringing 30 years of practice in the field of higher education to this position. Her vast experience allows her to successfully implement the priorities identified in Cecil College's strategic plan. She's a staunch advocate for higher education and economic development at the state, local, and national levels, and serves on the Maryland Association of Community Colleges Legislative Committee and Executive Committee. And last but hardly least, we have Mick Arnold from Arnold Packaging. For 88 years, Arnold Packaging has designed, manufactured, and distributed packaging materials. Mick was not at the company at the beginning of its tenure 88 years ago, but for the last 26 years as president, he's led the company in tripling the number of employees while increasing revenue 600%. He's brought efficiency to the operation, reduced cost of ownership, just as the company does for its customers. His primary responsibility is identifying trends in the manufacturing and e-commerce distribution and changes in clients' needs. With that insight, he sets the direction of the company and its constant push forward. As I said, you'll find more extensive information about our great speakers on the Founder City website and on the Economic Alliance's website. I'm going to ask each of the speakers to spend a few minutes talking a little bit more about their company, their place in the ecosystem of economic development in the greater Baltimore region. We'll go first with Jake.
Well, thank you, Michelle, and it's great to be part of this panel today. So to give you an overview of Catalyte, we're headquartered in Baltimore, and we've been here for about 20 years now. And our business really is built around this idea, this phenomena that talent and ability is evenly distributed, even if opportunity hasn't been. And what that means is that we're able to produce talent that others can't, because our technology enables us to discover, train, and advance new software developers from all walks of life. You know, we're using this to find people with these exceptional latent abilities that have been overlooked by traditional recruiting methods. People who frankly don't have traditional pedigrees, but have incredible potential. And what we can prove after over 20 years is that we can actually turn people who have these abilities into some of the best engineers, software engineers in the industry after they complete our very structured training and apprenticeship program. Our company, what we do is we typically find people and we are able to discover this talent in different types of populations. And when I say populations, you could be talking about a city or region like Baltimore or the greater DMV area. Or frankly, you could define a population as a community of interest. So we can find talent, for example, in Empower or other community groups. And you can also find talent within existing organizations. You know, we're actually working with a number of leading companies around helping them find existing employees who frankly may have been working in a call center or in a bank branch or maybe even a security guard in the company, and actually turn them into great engineers and redeploy them within those organizations. And what we can do ultimately is that by leveraging this technology, we can ultimately create talent pipelines all across the country of people that can be rapidly retrained and upskilled into these careers of the future, right? And by doing that, we can close the talent gap. We can produce a sustainable, vibrant technology workforce for different regions around the country, and ultimately be able to build the innovation capacity of the country, right? So that we can actually continually lead and grow and build the future innovation capacity. Because what's really lacking today is that we just don't have the talent or workforce for the future as we think about all the change that's coming down the pipe. So it starts all here right now in Baltimore. So thanks for having me on this panel.
Thanks, Jake, and I'm sure we'll hear more about what you do as we get into the question and answer period. Next, we'll hear from Emily Branchaw from UMBC Training Centers.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and it's great to be on this panel with all of these fantastic leaders from Baltimore. And it's unfortunate that Jake went right ahead of me because I was going to say very similar things about developing a technical workforce in Baltimore and nationally, and I think it shows the alignment across the workforce development efforts happening that my remarks are going to be so similar. So UMBC Training Centers, we are a nonprofit that's part of UMBC, a great educational and technical institution in Baltimore with a great heritage of educating students in the technical fields. And so UMBC Training Centers started as a professional development organization, and we've always had a touch with a workforce audience, those non-traditional students who are looking to change careers or start careers, but otherwise don't have access to those educational opportunities that a traditional student might. And then in the last 5 years, we've really ramped up those efforts. So we've started our cybersecurity apprenticeship program. We're working closely with Department of Labor to try to get a cyber apprenticeship up and running in our region, and then working with national partners as well. So there's so much opportunity there in the apprenticeship space. I think we'll see a lot of that coming up We've also seen many efforts to bring cybersecurity training into other industries. So partnering with manufacturing, for instance, to make those connections between the workforce development work that we're doing and industries that are seeing more and more their need for cybersecurity professionals. So I think that the same types of talent that Jake mentioned that we're trying to reach out to from different demographics and cultures and populations to bring them into the technical space and create more diversity and inclusion there, while also upskilling workers into needed professions. So connecting those employers out there who need those employees, that technical talent, with this population that is ready and has the aptitude to step into those roles. So we're doing a lot of that work at UMBC training centers, and it's really exciting to be on panels here and to see the efforts happening in the Baltimore area to continue to make those connections. So excited for this event today.
Great, thank you, Emily. Dr. Bolt.
Thank you very much. I'd like to first provide some context regarding community colleges. You know, the American Association of Community Colleges is really the primary advocacy group for the nation's community colleges. And just to remind you that there are over 1,200 two-year associate degree granting institutions and more than 12 million students in the community college system. The Maryland Association of Community Colleges is a unified voice for the Maryland 16 community colleges. And the association has worked very closely with businesses, communities, the government, and other organizations to improve student success, provide job training, apprenticeship, promote economic development across the state. Located in Northeast, Cecil College is one of Maryland's 16 community colleges. And as a primary point of entry for collegiate studies, community colleges are an integral and vital component of higher education in Maryland. And community colleges have had the primary delivery system for jobs training in support of economic development in Maryland. For example, in FY 2019, the 16 community colleges granted almost 15,000 associate degrees, 3,000 credit certificates, 14,000 continuing education certificates, almost 52,000 continuing education professional credentials, 68,000 contract training and business services, and over 37 students were touched through adult literacy programs. And our apprenticeship served over 4,500 students. For community colleges, we understand that the skills needed for the inclusive economy require workers that have more than a high school diploma. And to be sure, this is not a new phenomena, as you've heard from the data I presented, although there are many that are coming into the workforce development mission. Maryland's community colleges provides the most affordable post-secondary opportunity for students seeking transfer, workforce skills, working in a particular career field, earning credit certifications, and most important, an industry licensure or credentials. And our colleges, all 16, provide contract training opportunities that are very specifically tailored to the industry need, and they're designed to allow flexibility for the adult working population and the adult population. And at the same time, we partner with post-secondary opportunities with our Maryland high schools to allow for additional opportunities. And just when we take a look at American jobs by workers and educational level in 2018, I'm just going to bring one data point, skills training. In terms of jobs, 52% of the jobs require some type of skills training beyond high school. And in terms of the workers with those skills, it's about 43%. So we know that there's a gap that we need to help close. And we offer a program in our logistics supply chain. It's a certificate program and an associate degree program with specific transfer agreements to DeSalle University and American Public University. So is this field really needed? Absolutely. The expected job growth, it is expected to increase 27.4% from 2017 to 2022. And the annual job openings for logisticians are 896. Transportation, storage, and distribution managers have 301 annual openings, and industrial production managers have 212 annual job openings. The average monthly job postings from August 26 to 2018 for the positions I just stated are 924, with the average monthly hires of 473. Cecil College does offer programming in this area, and the outcomes include applying systems approach to managing product life cycle from inception through disposal, including design, manufacture, warehousing, and distribution. Another outcome is to formulate strategies to efficiently manage the activities that are involved in physically moving raw materials, inventory, and finished goods from the point of origin to the point of use or consumption. Also, outcome is to translate product and service requirements into facilities, procedures, and the organization's operational plan. Also, another outcome is to assess the impact of supply chain activities on the financial and managerial aspects of the orientation. And it's really a comprehensive short certificate and longer associate degree. Cecil College has the necessary resources in place to ensure student success in these programs, including advising, all the support that you would expect from any center, counseling center. And my plea today, as you're listening and participating, is we always have a need for more industry partners and workplace experiences for students who don't know about the industry and for students who want to enter the industry or to be promoted within the industry. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bolt. That's a great segue to Mick Arnold, because I know a mature company in existence for 88 years, but certainly undertaking the transformation from and manufacturing from an analog platform to a digital platform. Mick?
Yeah, thank you, Mary. That was great. I really appreciate the lead in, because I'm traveling in those spaces, and our customers are the ones that are so sorely needing those types of skills, and there is a huge void. So thank you so much for having me today. I'm looking forward to the discussion, and what a great panel. I've already learned a lot just from our initial meetings and some of the reading I've done. I'm the president of Arnold Packaging and Arnold Automation, which I'm going to weave in a lot today. Arnold Packaging is an 88-year-old manufacturer and distributor of packaging materials. And we've always been in the automation space and typically end of line. So if you think about the packaging operations of a McCormick or Procter & Gamble, where they're setting up boxes and filling them and doing typical end of line, we have watched over the last 5, 6, 7 years the landscape of personnel and employee availability and both quality and quantity start to suffer. And it's because the economies have been so good. You know, we've watched GDP with some big bumps in the last 4, 5, 6 years. At one point, it had unemployment down in the 3.6, 3.7% range. And in certain areas of the country, they were sub 1%. If you look at some of the booming economies of Texas or Tennessee and other states where they have a little bit more economic activity, especially in manufacturing, than Maryland, they were seeing unemployment rates even lower. And our customers were reaching out to us and asking what we could do to help. What tools did we have in our toolbox to help them with their productivity needs? And I'll talk today a lot about productivity, not just input. I mean, a lot of the things we'll talk about today will be the individuals and the humans and the input quotient. But really what they were asking us was to help them with their productivity quotients. And that's the balance between input and output. So about 4 years ago, we went one step deeper and formed an automation division that is focused on helping manufacturers and also e-commerce distributors. I mean, we're fortunate in that we have 1,100 purchasing customers. 600 of them distribute things and 400 of them make things. So my lens is a bit diverse, and then I'm in these manufacturing and distribution centers, and I'm working with them individually and helping them get more product out the door and manage and balance that input output. And e-commerce being a huge driver right now. It was already heading towards a tremendous amount of growth. The pandemic has just kicked that into overdrive. So as it relates to the need for these types of skills, and Emily and Mary hit it right on the head, there is an incredible shortage in all of these different disciplines where, yes, we are starting to automate. But the reason that you're seeing automation is because there simply isn't the quality and quantity of workforce needed to meet the demands of manufacturers and e-commerce distributors. And one of the responses to that is to automate. But when we look at the types of people that are going to be needed to drive this automation and manage these processes and have the skill set to work in the IT environment or to work in the computer aspect environment, there's a tremendous amount of shortcoming and shortfall that is still keeping, right? Even though we are putting in or we are doing some automation in spots, you still need a certain skill set and a certain upskilling of workers to be able to run this equipment and run it productively. Otherwise, it's just a rather expensive piece of equipment that sits there or doesn't ever reach its full potential because it doesn't have the human interaction to make it do what it's supposed to do. So I love sitting on these panels because our diverse nature of customer and therefore my diverse nature of experience, I am talking to the corner offices of manufacturers and big e-commerce distributors on a daily basis. And, you know, the challenges that Emily and Mary have hit on are extremely real. Our organization struggles to get this type of talent. And then we have our customers asking us, what are you doing? Where do you find these people? How do you cultivate them? I need somebody to do this and that. And these are great jobs. These are high 5-figure and some points low 6-figure jobs. And I think Jake's on it. You know, if we can identify these folks and identify the aptitude, I love that word, then there's a whole host of jobs to be filled.
That's terrific. You know, each of you have talked about the need for more workers, more employees, more talent, and the gap between the individuals that are coming out of training, whether it's certification or 2 or 4 years, 2 or 4 year colleges. And we know that within IT related jobs, there's a perception that for IT, particularly for cyber, you need a 4-year degree. And on the flip side, for logistics and manufacturing, there's a perception that these are very low paying jobs, you know, boring, standing at an assembly line, et cetera, et cetera. So what role can each of you play, or all of you collectively, to get into the middle schools and high schools in the region and inform individuals who may not even be thinking about college, but don't have a clue what they might do after high school? Jake or anybody who wants to start.
Sure. No, that's a great question, and thank you, Michele. So we're obviously trying lots of different approaches, right? And we partner with different organizations like Code in the Schools in Baltimore. We're starting to work with other groups that are kind of getting us directly into the high schools as well. But I'll go back to something that I think has been very consistent across this panel, which is that there is this kind of misconception that there aren't jobs available right now. And the reality is there's over 7 million jobs that are open right now, right? That are, and I have not met one employer, literally I have not met any employers, who've said that they have all the talent that they need, that there's not, everybody is complaining that there's just not enough people that they can hire. And so, what I think is missing is that what we need to be able to do is start to build more pathways into these careers, right? And I think the challenge has been that, we have sort of, kind of assumed that people will just figure it out on their own, or that they'll sort of find that pathway themselves. And the reality is, I think a lot of people are not even aware of what these jobs and careers are, right? There's conceptions about what these positions are. Even when you think about my world of software engineer, there's this fallacy that, great engineers are the people who went to Stanford and MIT and, were math geeks in high school. And the reality is, if you actually look at sort of the founders, the people who actually built the tech industry, a lot of them didn't go to college, right? A lot of them didn't, famously, you have people like Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg dropped out of college. But I think that you'll find that, in Silicon Valley, where I'm originally from, you'll find that a lot of the great engineers that you meet are people that you would never expect have been sort of engineers, at least based on, kind of what I would consider popular misconceptions, right? The engineers that come from my world are people who may have been veterans, right? They may have been baristas, they may have been food service workers, they may be coming from the hospitality industry, right? The point really is that your past performance is not an indication of your future potential, right? And I think that what we need to do as a country is figure out whether it's expansion of registered apprenticeships, which I understand the Biden administration is already working on, whether that become more employer-sponsored training programs, Those are the kinds of things that we need to start thinking about, right? Is that what we need is an on-ramp to these careers, and be able to help people kind of discover that along the, and help kind of point people in those directions in terms of what are vibrant, great careers of the future that they can actually build long-term, lifetime values in.
That's exactly right. I mean, the need to educate, the population, particularly kids who are still in school, what the opportunities are is really huge. But on the flip side, and Emily, I know that you all have struggled with this, particularly in the world of cybersecurity. While you may be able to convince a potential employer that somebody with a credential or training, 2-year training program or whatever, can certainly take on an entry-level job in cybersecurity. Employers might say, well, that's all well and good. I'd be willing to do that, but they need 5 years of experience. So how do you bridge that gap between the educational training part of it and the experience part of it? Because that cancels out. If you have 5 years of experience, then you don't need an entry-level job.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question. I think that it also comes out of what Jake was saying towards the end of his statement he just made, which is needing educational pathways. And the thing is that there's so much opportunity to educate and train people in so many different ways. And so if that's a work study type program, like an apprenticeship to develop some experience, if you don't have the amount of professional experience that an employer needs, potentially it's traditional degrees. We're part of the university system, so we're fully in support of degrees for who that makes sense to. If that's a training program like ours, if it's a program like Catalyte, I think that there's so much opportunity to develop different pathways to these jobs and to work with employers to figure out what works best for them. And so that conversation to continue to talk to an employer about what does 5 years experience actually mean to you? Are you looking for someone with life experience? Do you want someone who's been in a professional setting and is going to show up on time? Do you want someone who's encountered these kinds of problems before in the workspace? Do you want someone who's encountered these kind of problems in training? And so I think that we've been having a lot of conversations with employers in the Baltimore region and nationally about what does that actually mean to you, that experience number, and how do we begin to create something that's more accessible for these individuals looking to enter the workspace. And I think that that's happening in many different areas. So we need to continue to work in the federal government on contract requirements. It's a big hindrance to the 4-year degree and the experience levels. We need to continue to work with the larger employers who have had the same job recs for the last 10 years and just say 5 years experience or a 4-year degree. I think those conversations, I imagine that all of us on this panel are having them all the time. And it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but it's instead looking to find the different ways that we can bring diversity of experience and diversity of education into the technical career space.
And Mick and Dr. Bolt, on the other end, particularly with distribution, warehousing, manufacturing, the perception is these are low-paying jobs, they're dead-end jobs. And the reality is that even at the entry level, these are career pathway jobs. And Mick, you made the point that these are jobs that require skill, require education, and lead to a solid income in terms of salary. So from the perspective of both the college as well as the employer, what more can we be doing in this region to get people to understand that these are, first of all, these are amazingly growing industries. E-commerce has done amazing things to logistics, warehousing, and manufacturing. So what do we need to do to make sure that individuals understand that not only there are jobs that are available, but there is baseline technology skills that are needed even for entry-level jobs in these industries?
Yeah, I can start because I wanted to yes and Jake and that we struggle with the same thing. I mean, first of all, as it relates to manufacturing and demonstration, only 4% of Marylanders work in manufacturing. So everyone knows a doctor and a lawyer and different people in and around their lives. And just simply by the statistical nature, you just don't know a lot of people that work in manufacturing because only 4 out of 100 of us do. So you're simply less likely to come in contact. We engage with organizations like Junior Achievement that have an absolute foothold in the 8th grade realm, when they'll bring every Baltimore County school through someplace like Biz Hub and something along those lines, where we can start to get in front of these kids and show them that the Ford plant that's still in their history book, unfortunately, from 1930, with a bunch of workers standing in front of a black car with dirt on them, is not what manufacturing looks like in today's world. That advanced manufacturing today looks more like a lab, and the skills that are producing these products are much higher level and incredible demand, and therefore pay that way. I mean, if you're making something in the global economy of 2021, you are very productive. You have figured it out, and your industry or your particular company has not found a reason to take their jobs overseas when you have input costs that are exponentially less expensive than here in the United States. So you're already doing something that's unique in that you have found a way to compete profitably in that space. So in the manufacturing world and also in the e-commerce, and I speak to that more, not that distribution isn't important in all types, but if you look at the e-commerce component, the handling is a little bit different. The amount of workforce that's required generally to do things inside of warehouses, everyone knows about Amazon's ability to automate, and the number of fewer people they need to get product out the door efficiently. Well, for each of those people that aren't actually walking aisles for days and walking 10, 15 miles, picking stuff off of a shelf, there are technologists and people that are making those systems move, and they are incredibly valuable and they're paid very well. So the challenge for us is to make sure that we are exposing the younger part of the workforce. And I just have one more thing too. It's a unique time, and what I see in my travels is that there are 4 very diverse generations that are in the workforce right now, between boomers and Xers and Y and Z. And one thing that's different, to Emily's point, is this every job is a tech job. All of them, 100% of jobs in today's world are tech jobs. And when it comes back to that experience question, I would even start to ask or take a look at the generation that you're dealing with, not to try to broad brush any one particular generation, but if you're talking that someone is Gen Z, for example, now they're just starting to get to the workforce, they are digital natives, and they have skills that have been ingrained in them since they were born. So they're going to show up a little differently than somebody that's been in the workforce a little longer that might need upskilling. When you say they need quote unquote experience, what does that mean? The manufacturing world is doing a great job in changing the user interfaces to look like the video games, right? The user experience for Windows. It's not these decrepit DOS looking parentheses and what you would have found in industrial programming. So that experience piece is maybe less important, just because it's more typical, and they're starting to see that user interface look much more similar across a lot of different applications. So while they might not have said at a desk called this, the interfaces are such that they have experience in navigating them, and when you click this, you can expect this outcome.
Thank you. If I may add
Please.
to the esteemed panel here, I think the points are well taken, that many do not know what jobs and where those jobs are. And so it's upon us to get to the students early. And you not only need to get to that 8th grade student or that 6th grade student, you need to get to their guardians or their parents to let them know the jobs, because if those perceptions, depending on the age, there are certain perceptions about what manufacturing looks like, what logistics looks like, and we know that is not the case. And for those who've not been in those environments, you really need to see them through a video or in-person tour, because they are very, very different. And I think it's so critical, and I think everyone really hit upon this, is really to take the person from the experiences they have and add on. And in higher education, and Emily, we call them stackable credentials. It might be a life experience where you have a skill set and we add to it, and we think that we're adding value, and that value gets added and layered depending on the industry specific requirements. But there are some very basic skill sets that start very, very early And as was stated, all jobs are tech jobs. They have some part of technology. And, I think the key is getting to the workforce earlier and earlier, and even existing workforce, those as we work very closely with our workforce investment boards when employees have been laid off, to really think about retooling and restructuring the job that they've not had yet. And I think based on the examples provided on this panel, there are ways that we can reach that audience. And it's really working very closely with systems that are in place. But unfortunately, sometimes we don't know all of those systems in place. So I hope today will be helpful in saying, look, you can reach out to your community college, your UMBC training center, your workforce investment board, Catalyte. You can reach out. And I think it's also very important to have that workforce experience. So to provide a test drive. Are we a good fit? No, but I'm not a good fit here, but this is an industry that might fit me better with the skill set that I have. Same skill set, different part of the industry. And so it's very crucial. Think about what we do with our public schools and even in our community college and four-year institutions. What exposure do our students and families have regarding this industry? And we want to make sure that it is very, very positive. So when we meet with advisors and counselors and workforce groups, we try to ensure that do people understand even the nomenclature and the language that's associated with manufacturing, distribution, logistics. It's almost a different language of its own. And so it's not as scary as it thinks, as it sounds. I'm sorry, it doesn't think, but actually a lot of the logistics really do think on their own, right? AI and some other things that are going on. So I think that there's so much that we can do, but it really is partnering. It's partnering very early in the middle schools. It's partnering with the high schools, the School of Technology, the workforce boards, the community colleges, the four-year institutions, great companies like Catalyte. There are so many opportunities, and I think that we just need to not be afraid to extend our partnerships, because we all are here to help, not only this region, but the state. When you think about how can we best help Maryland and the citizens and the workers of Maryland, because you're not just impacting Maryland, you're impacting the global economy. And I think that collectively we can make that happen.
Yeah, you've all mentioned retraining and upskilling in one way, shape, or form. The pipelines for individuals who have lost their jobs, for example, or feel they're in dead-end jobs or looking for a change. So finding the pipeline, to be retrained, so to speak, is a challenge. There are a lot of resources out there, but it's also difficult to find those resources. And I think the workforce investment boards, is one avenue. But I'm also interested, Mick, in your thoughts on the upskilling for your legacy workers, for the individuals who, I hate to age myself, that are of my generation, the 50 and 60-year-olds who've been at the job for a very long time, and may know how to turn on a computer. And I don't mean to denigrate anybody's skills, but what are you doing to upskill that legacy workforce?
So unfortunately, we're doing a lot of it internally. We haven't necessarily found the types of programs that work for what we're doing. And Mary hit on some great things in her intro, and some things that piqued my ears in why we haven't had as much success with some of the community colleges and those types of organizations. And generally, when we see those programs, so imagine that we have workers that are working here now, they've got great aptitude, they're smart individuals, and we're trying to expose them to more so they can do more, be more. A lot of the programs you run into can tend to be a little bit long, or they don't have easy entry and exit points. So imagine that you work 40 hours a week in a box manufacturing plant, which is what we do here. And then you're also going to have to create time amongst your family life and the other things that you do to get the upskilling. So a lot of that we bring in-house, and we will partner and pair our automation team, who in general are engineers, they're higher end mechanics. They're doing controls or programming generally and ladder logic and things that are used in the industrial world. So we will pair them up. We will do a lot of job type share and shadow inside of our organization. We are fortunate to have a very diverse group of jobs. So we have logistics here, right? We have our own transportation organization. We have warehousing here. We have manufacturing. We have pure automation and are working with robotics and vision. So we're very fortunate in that we can, right under our own roof, expose people to different types of professions and opportunities, train them in-house, and we are generally looking internal first. So if there's something or an opportunity that presents, either because we've gone into something new, a new business endeavor, or because somebody has been promoted out of a role and we now have to fill it with somebody, we're generally looking in-house first and trying to provide the skills that are needed. But there's one thing I just want to say too. I mean, one of the things we don't do on a really simple level in the state of Maryland, and I haven't seen it anywhere, this is not a Maryland knock, this is really anywhere on my travels, is we simply don't catalog the talent that we have. We do a hell of a job tracking lacrosse players, but we don't track our talent at all. I mean, I can get lacrosse players for days, and there's all kinds of wonderful tools out there where they can put in their 40 times, and they can put in their SAT scores and their GPAs, and they can record greetings, and coaches can go and look at them. But there's nowhere that I can do that in the workforce side of the business. And it's very fragmented. And Jake hit on it. He said, there's jobs, there's tons of jobs, and there's tons of people looking for jobs. And one simple fix is that we've got to bridge the supply demand gap. There's a tremendous amount of jobs over on this side. There's a tremendous amount of supply of humans on this side. Some of them need some upskilling and reskilling. I certainly understand that. But one of the simple things we can do is to bridge this gap between supply and demand. And the fact that there are people looking for jobs when there are so many jobs to be had, especially in this area. And a simple way to do that would be to have something that was more centralized. I mean, you can go on eHarmony for $49 a month and find yourself a wife, but I can't find a computer programmer or a CAD programmer anywhere without going through Indeed. Or you have to have all of these specialized relationships. We work with people like Center for Urban Families, Christopher Place. What ends up happening as an employer, you have to manage all of these relationships, and it's cumbersome. It's hard to be able to do the work and produce what you have to produce, and then have to have 3 educational relationships, and then I have reskilling or re-entry type relationships. So even something as simple as a centralized repository or database of talent that's very smart and very intuitive, that would borrow from some of these matching type softwares, would be a huge help for somebody like us that despite having to make things, still have the time to find people and get the right people where the traction is higher, the fall rate, the attrition rate is lower, because manufacturers in general and in distribution, we are spending a fortune to find talent, a fortune. And we've outsourced a lot of it to the staffing agencies and headhunter type organizations of the world. And just by simply, if we just do a couple things, catalog our talent and break down these walls between supply and demand, where kids are coming out of great schools like UMBC, Hopkins, Maryland, and they don't have anywhere to go. They definitely have somewhere to go, but for whatever reason, that there's just not an easy path for making these connections.
That's really an amazing observation and all too true. I'd be interested in hearing the others' thoughts on that.
I think that Mick is certainly on to something. It's a challenge just within your own organizations. I think we've heard the panel members say, trying to find out your own organization talent and what's needed. And, sometimes it's hard to share. You might have an expert and you really don't share those employees, right? Because you don't want to lose them and you've invested a lot of time. So I think that type of information, if we're going to continue to support the workforce in Maryland, which again supports a global economy, that we're going to have to move towards these opportunities of a repository of talent and cataloging the talent that we have, because we certainly are producing in terms of looking at talent through higher education, through the community colleges, through all the four-year institutions in Maryland and all our professional development programs that we have. But I think there is a gap of connecting that end product being the student with that credential or that worker with that credential to the business world in a seamless way. And it is very frustrating. I can imagine working with all the organizations, because sometimes colleges, we feel the same way. Well, what do you mean you need a person with this skill set? And so, then we try and come in and say, okay, here's what you need. And that takes a lot of your valuable time when you could be working on something else as running your companies. I think it's something that we recognize from the training and educational side is exactly what is it that you want, because this is what we have. And we don't want to assume when we put out a curriculum or we say we have this programming, it might not meet all the needs, but we can adjust it to meet the needs of this company. So I think the point is well taken. And I know, Emily, you probably might have some similar thoughts regarding when it comes to training for those industries. But I think that's a great start to not only showcase what's out there, but what the future looks like for educational providers and connecting them with the workforce providers.
Yeah, Mary, I definitely agree with everything you just said. And I think that what I keep thinking about as we're talking, it's been really interesting for us because we've discovered that small to medium-sized employers are much more likely to hire our non-traditional students. They don't have necessarily the funds to hire the talent that they might want. And so they look at our students that they may have to put alongside one of their experienced employees, and they're willing to put kind of the time in because recruitment costs can be so high. So I know that doesn't really answer a question, but it's been an interesting thing that we've discovered and realized as we've been working with employers, that we found a lot more just kind of openness to the non-traditional student model amongst those smaller employers, because there's just not as much bureaucracy and tradition in their organizations as there are in the larger employers. And so I think that kind of database that Mick mentioned could be a game changer for those larger employers who have very specific requirements for their employees. And that's where the challenge has been to connect our students who have very non-traditional backgrounds. They may have spent 10 years as a house cleaner or 10 years working at Pizza Hut, and now they have this cybersecurity training with maybe 3 months of an internship, and they're not going to match those traditional recs, but they could be an amazing employee and they could be the next generation of your workforce. And so we need more openness to that in the larger employers, but then I also think we need to make that a little bit more accessible to those larger employers, and a database would be an excellent way to do that.
Thank you. Any thoughts on that, Jake? Or I have one more question.
Sure, I'll just make a small point. I think I think Mick has really hit on the key point here, which is, frankly, most employers don't have really good understanding of the outcomes of training, right? And that's what makes training really difficult, is that a company, if a company could come to a definitive measurement of, frankly, their return on the investment of training, they would be cranking that training wheel all day long, right? Especially compared to recruiting costs today. The challenge is that most employers don't really have that ability to measure the efficacy of a training program. So when you look at sort of Catalyte, one of the things that makes us very unique is that we are not just a training company, we're an employer, right? So at the end of the day, I have a minimum of, typically, most of the people who come through our program stay with us about 5 years. So at a minimum, I can actually connect 5 years out. I can sort of measure the efficacy of an apprenticeship and a training program and the pacing of progression of an individual throughout that over the course of 5 years. And of course, now we also keep a tether on our alumni who end up leaving, going on to amazing things. We have over 24 sort of CIOs and CTOs now in our alumni network, and we can track that, right? So we can create this closed data loop that connects long-term outcomes, right? Long-term success back to sort of that hiring funnel, right? And I think that today, if employers really spend some time to actually start moving backwards, and ultimately this is Moneyball, right? If you can actually sort of if you can measure long-term outcomes like baseball teams can do, and I like Mick used the lacrosse analogy, you can work backwards to build teams and then frankly build teams comprised of people who maybe walk-on players who go on to become extraordinary, can beat those A-list teams that other teams franchise put together. That's really the concept, right? It's really still connecting, creating this closed data loop between long-term success outcomes and that hiring funnel.
And I would just like to say one more thing. I mean, but
Please.
to Emily's point, you're seeing a lot of creativity right now, and Emily spoke to employers' interest or in looking at different types of employees. One of the reasons is because we're absolutely desperate, completely desperate. You know, these ideas in the past where you would have to have a 4-year this or a 5-year that, or, you know, right now it is finding and trying to identify people with aptitude that can help you meet the demand that you have from your customer base, because your extinction could possibly depend on it if you can't get it. So a lot of the walls have been broken down. So it's a great time for these programs like Emily and Mary have. It's a great time to get them in front of manufacturers where we'll say, you know, I won't turn a blind eye to certain candidates that don't have an education pedigree. I need aptitude. I need somebody to give me a worker that wants to show up and do certain things. So I think we've got a wonderful runway here because of how creative, especially the smaller organizations are, Emily, because they're just limited on resources. We just don't have the resources that the Black & Deckers and McCormick's do. So we have to get more creative and stay scrappy to survive.
Fascinating conversation. I think we have time for one more question. And Mick, you alluded to this a couple of times, and that is the exponential growth of e-commerce, a lot of which has been fueled by the pandemic. We've all gotten used to shopping online, and everybody wants their product delivered yesterday, let alone today. But I'm interested to hear from Jake and Emily as well, in terms of how the pandemic, you know, distance learning and working from home has impacted the demand for the types of potential employees that you are turning out from Catalyte and from UMBC training centers, and from you as well, Mary. Jake?
Yeah, so for us, you know, we were able to go remote overnight. The good news is that we actually had already prepped our training program to do that, because that was part of the strategy. So it kind of forced us to accelerate those plans quite a bit through COVID. But I'll tell you, like, what we're learning through it, and, you know, especially as the lights are turning back on now, is that there are also different qualities, you know, there are different qualities for success now that we can see in this remote world, right? So before, when we're all sort of sitting together in offices, you know, there was a lot, you know, you'd have obviously a lot more opportunity for kind of these informal support networks. What we're sort of learning through COVID is that, you know, independence is actually an important sort of part of that career, right? Especially if we think about technology, and so far my best guess is half of the tech industry is going to stay remote for the first, you know, at least well into the future. With that, you know, the ability to work independently, the ability to frankly work in this kind of a remote world is going to be very critical as a future sort of mechanism for success. So one of the things that we saw in early days was, you know, when we went to a remote training model, we saw a bigger dropout rate, right? So suddenly, whereas we used to graduate somewhere between 85 to 95% of each training class, it sort of fell to about 70%, you know, during COVID. And it slowly built back up as we've started to actually add some, you know, sort of sourcing for independence as a potential attribute or aptitude in individuals. That has come back up again. But I think it's starting to kind of, again, it's introducing some different variables, some different things to consider in terms of those long-term success outcomes, again, as we think about the future in a kind of a hybrid mode, at least for the engineering world.
Yeah.
If I may, when we had to go remote over a year ago, we had a continuity of operations plan, and we were able to move to all online in terms of teaching and learning and in terms of services. And I think the point's well taken that Jacob said is that we're not going to switch 100% back. It's going to be a combined, you know, there is some face-to-face plus online, and we've learned to do things actually in some of our operations more efficiently through technology, and actually using the right technology for the problem that we were experiencing. And so there have been a lot of lessons learned, and we continue to learn. So I think it will be certainly a mix of both face-to-face and online. And we certainly are operating in a different environment, and we don't expect that environment, even if we come 100% back on campus, that remote online piece will remain with us forever, and will certainly have us change how we think of ourselves as learning and training centers.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that Mary and Jake said about training in this online space, particularly in the going remote overnight and accelerating plans to do so anyway. As Jake mentioned, we were very similar at training centers. I think the only point I would add is that we've seen our training become much more accessible in some ways. So people who've had problems with transportation or childcare or the ability to get off work on time to attend a class have suddenly had those restrictions lifted, and with it being online, and so they can do their class from anywhere. They don't need a reliable car or public transit to get to the classroom. So that's been really encouraging, and I think something we're going to explore moving forward, that if we do return to the classroom, which we will most likely return in some kind of hybrid model to the classroom, how do we maintain that accessibility? But then on the other hand, we've discovered new challenges to accessibility, like internet access, or do you own a personal computer at home? Do you have a laptop? Do you have a space where you can sit and quietly take a class? So I think it's opened up new questions of accessibility to training while also removing other barriers to training. And that's been an interesting thing to explore in the workforce development space as we've all been remote from one another.
Mick, you get the last word.
Oh, I'd like to add one thing, just in that, look, if the pandemic has done one other great thing, it's that we have, at least in our space and industry, we've created more content. We're creating content right now. And yes, we used to sit on a stage together and somebody would videotape it, but the amount of content that has been created in our industry specifically, and sitting on the governor's workforce development board, I've been pounding the table for more content creation. If we want to give potential employees or that want to come into our industries a glimpse inside of our buildings, it's not efficient to put people on buses and drive them all over the place and do plant tours. It's not efficient for me. It's not efficient or cost effective for the organizations, whether that be Baltimore City Public Schools, Baltimore County Public Schools, Junior Achievement. We've gotten into this new process, and we create more content now than we ever have, and we will not let our foot off the gas. Is that I think it's important that we continue to use all of these new content creation tools. These meeting tools are great, but they're also incredible content creation tools that we have to stay on top of and continue to use this as a vehicle to show our industries and where all of this demand is. And that could just be another mechanism for bridging that gap between supply and demand of talent and people who need talent.
Thank you. And I think that concludes our discussion. I hope that all the listeners have found this as fascinating as I have. Thank you, Jake Sue. Thank you, Dr. Mary Bolt. Thank you, Emily Branchaw. And thank you, Mick Arnold, for taking the time to talk with us and give us your thoughts on the world of employment, workforce training, and COVID-19 in terms of how it's impacted our world and will continue to impact our world for the foreseeable future. So thank you all very much. And thanks again to Baltimore and FITSE for giving us this opportunity.